I have catalogued 11,000 dead worlds in my service to the Thessan survey, and I have never been afraid of any of them. Dead things do not move. That was the first principle they taught us in the cataloging halls, recited until it lived in the fourth hand, the writing hand, the one we trust least and use most. A world that has finished dying cannot harm you. You walk its bones, you measure its silence, you write it down, and you leave. I believed that the way I believed in the steadiness of my own four limbs. I no longer believe either thing without checking first. This is the record of Caldris, and of the small human the charter forced upon us, and of the morning the ridge went quiet. I am setting it down because the official survey log is a lie of omission, and because I am old now, and because the young adjuncts who come to me with their soft inner hands still ungloved deserve to hear it from someone who was on the ground when it happened, rather than from the sealed file that says only that the expedition encountered hostile elements and was successfully extracted. We were not extracted. We were spared. There is a difference, and a human taught it to me. We were 9 Thessan when we came down through the high amber haze of Caldris in the survey lighter. 9 catalogers, which is to say 9 soft scholars with long necks and 4 hands apiece, and bodies built for libraries and low gravity and recycled air. I will give you our names because they mattered to me and because most of them are gone. Cessanarch Val, our expedition lead, old even by my measure, with the gray crest and the patient cruelty of a man who has never once been wrong in a room full of people afraid to correct him. Adjunct cartographer Imrel, young, brilliant, vain about her field instruments. The brothers Tashin and Tashel, soil and stone men, inseparable, forever arguing about strata. Old Queneth the linguist, who could read a dead language off a doorframe but could not read a living face to save her life. 2 junior recorders whose names I will keep, because their families never learned how close it came, and I will not be the one to tell them. And myself, Surveyor Adjunct Alan Ra, second to Val, the one who held the manifest and signed the requisitions and argued, that morning, against bringing the human at all. Caldris had been a city once. From the lighter it looked like a wound that had been left open too long and gone gray at the edges. The survey designation called it a Tier 11 biosphere collapse, abandoned, no native sapients remaining, salvage rights contested between 3 minor stellar concerns who had hired us to settle the question of what was actually down there before they spent ships fighting over it. A clean job. A dead job. The kind I had done 11,000 times. The ruined towers stood in their long rows along the spine of a ridge, and below them the wasteland fell away in shelves of broken stone toward a dry sea, and over all of it the sun of Caldris hung white and enormous and merciless in a sky the color of old brass. And on the manifest, in the slot the charter would not let me leave empty, was one line I had tried 4 separate times to strike. Security Escort, 1, contracted, human, saturation world certification. I want to be honest about what I thought, because the whole point of this record is honesty. I thought it was a waste of a passenger berth. The saturation world certification was a piece of bureaucratic theater, in my view, a clause the insurers had inserted after some incident on some other expedition, the way insurers always do, governing by the last disaster instead of the next one. Saturation worlds were the ones our atlases marked in the heaviest ink. High gravity. Thick, poisoned, oxygen-drunk air. Lethal radiation gradients. Apex predators stacked 6 and 7 deep in the food chains. Worlds where life had not so much evolved as gone to war with itself for 1 billion years and produced, at the end of all that violence, things that could only have come from there. The certification meant a human, because humans came from the worst of those worlds, a place their own atlases marked at the very top of the saturation scale, and the underwriters had decided that on certain expeditions you wanted one of them standing between your soft catalogers and whatever the universe had left lying around. I thought it was superstition. I had met humans. I had read the literature. I knew the literature was written, mostly, by people who had also never met a human under load. Her name was Mara Quist. She came aboard the lighter at the transfer station with a single hard case and a long coat the dull no color of stone, and she was, I will say it plainly, unimpressive. She was small, smaller than I had pictured, shorter than my own shoulder, with the compact density humans have that makes them look like they have been left out in the rain and shrunk. Her hair was cut short and was the brown of nothing in particular. Her face was ordinary and a little tired and entirely calm, and there was a faint white seam of old scarring along one cheekbone that she did not appear to think about. She had 2 hands, which still struck me as a deficiency every time I worked with humans, 2 hands to do the work of our 4, and she moved as if 2 were sufficient, which I found almost arrogant before I understood it was simply true. She did not introduce herself with the small ceremony our contracts usually warrant. She found Cessanarch Vol, who outranked everyone, and she said, "Sergeant Mara Quist, I'm your escort. I've read the survey profile. I have questions about the descent corridor and the dust season, then I'll stay out of your way." Her voice was low and flat and unhurried. She did not waste a single sound on warmth. Vol, who liked to be courted, looked at her the way you look at a tool someone has left on your desk, and told her the descent corridor and the dust season were the concern of professionals, and that her concern was to remain near the perimeter and discharge her contract if the unlikely occurred. "Understood," she said, not offended, not deferent, just filing it. I watched her eyes move once around the lighter's hold, slowly taking the measure of us, the soft long necks and the writing hands and the field cases, and I had the brief uncomfortable sensation of being inventoried. Then it passed, and she sat down with her hard case between her boots, and she was quiet for the entire descent in a way none of us were, because we chattered. We always chatter. We are a species that fills silence with proposed hypotheses. And she simply watched the city come up at us through the amber haze with the unbothered attention of someone reading a weather report. We made landing on the broad terrace at the top of the ridge, where the old city had its grand approaches, and the moment the lighter's ramp came down and the outside air of Cauldrus rolled in, everything I thought I knew about the value of the escort line on my manifest began, very slowly, to come apart. The air hit us like a hand. The gravity here was heavier than our standard by a margin that did not sound like much in the briefing and felt, on the ground, like wearing the planet itself. Within the first hour, all 8 of my catalogers were laboring. The juniors went gray at the edges of their crests. Imrel, who was young and proud, tried to carry her own instrument case down the ramp and had to set it down twice. Old Queneth's breathing took on the thin whistle that, in a Thessan of her years, you learned to be afraid of. The heat came off the white stone in sheets. The thin, acrid wind carried particulates that scoured our inner eyelids and made us all weep without grief. We had our environmental supports, of course, our cooling weaves and our breathing assists, and they helped, and we were never in real danger from the world itself. But we were diminished by it. Every motion cost. Every breath was work. By midday, we were a column of scholars moving at the pace of the slowest, conserving, complaining in the small ways that complaint becomes when you do not have the air to spare for the large ways. Mara Quist carried her own case and 2 of ours, walked the perimeter of every halt without being asked, ate when we ate and less, and did not labor. I want to be precise about this because it is the first thing that changed my mind. It was not that she was unaffected. I came to understand later that she felt the gravity and the heat the way I would feel a long flight of stairs, as a thing that registers and is then dismissed. Her body had been built somewhere worse. The same conditions that turned my expedition into a column of invalids were, to her, simply Tuesday on a mild planet. She moved through Cauldrus the way I moved through the cataloging halls. It was not strength as we measured it, the contractor muscle the insurers imagined. It was a deeper thing, an indifference written into the meat, a body that had been forged on a world that killed the unfit before they could breed, and had therefore stopped treating hardship as an event. She set the perimeter that first night without asking permission, and Vol let her, because Vol had stopped having the spare breath to assert himself. She chose the positions with a kind of unhurried economy that I noticed without understanding. She put our sleeping shelter against the high broken wall of a tower so that we could only be approached from 3 sides, and then she watched the 3 sides. She did not sleep when we slept. I know because I do not sleep well off-world, and I sat up in the shelter mouth in the small hours, and she was simply there, a still shape against the wall with the white moon of Caldrus behind her, watching the dark wasteland fall away below the ridge. She had not lit anything. She was not doing anything I could see. She was only watching, the way the rest of us watch a delicate experiment, with a patience that does not feel like patience from the inside because there is nothing else you would rather be doing. "You should rest, Sergeant," I said, because I was uncomfortable and wanted her to be a person I could be polite to instead of a presence I could not categorize. She did not turn her head all the way. "I rest when the light's up," she said. "Things that hunt here hunt at night. I'll sleep when I can see them coming." "There is nothing alive on Caldrus," I said, with the confidence of a man who had read the survey profile. "Tier 11 collapse, no native sapients. The fauna died with the biosphere." "The native fauna, maybe," she said, and that was all. She let the silence after it do the rest of the work, and I lay awake a long time trying to understand what she had not said, which is a thing humans are very good at, leaving the dangerous part of a sentence for you to find on your own. The next 2 days, we worked the upper city and the work was good. This is the part the survey log gets right. Caldrus had been built by something that loved the long view, terraced galleries cut into the ridge stone, towers that leaned out over the drop, and everywhere the carved record of a people who had clearly known they were ending and had wanted to say so in stone. Gwyneth wept over the doorframe inscriptions, this time with grief, the real kind. The Tashin brothers found a fault line in the strata that rewrote the planet's whole geological clock, and argued about it with such joy that for whole hours I forgot to be uncomfortable. Imrel mapped the galleries with her good instruments, and her vanity, and produced models so clean they made me proud to sign the manifest. This was the work. This was why I had given my 4 hands to the survey. I let myself believe, those 2 days, that the human had been a formality after all, an expensive piece of insurance against a risk that the dead would not pose. Mara Quist worked too in her way. She did not catalog, but she walked every gallery before we entered it, and she stood for long minutes at the lips of the terraces looking down at the lower city and the wasteland beyond. And on the second evening she came to find me where I was logging the day's manifest, and she sat down across from me and she said, without preamble, "We're being watched." I will be honest about my reaction because the whole value of this record is in not flattering myself. I was annoyed. I had had 2 good days. The expedition was producing the finest survey of my career, and here was the contractor, the line on the manifest I had tried to strike, telling me ghost stories. "By what, Sergeant?" I said, and I did not keep all of the dryness out of it. "The dead." "By a ship," she said, unmoved by my tone, which I came to learn was a thing she simply did not register, the way you do not register the weather of a room you have already decided to leave. "Single hull, low orbit, been tracking our position since yesterday midday. It's keeping a station. Then there's the dust." She nodded down toward the lower city, toward the long shelves of broken stone that fell away into the dry sea basin. 3 plumes since this morning. Wrong size for wind. Wind dust is flat and wide. Those are narrow and they move against the prevailing. That's something on the ground, working its way up the shelves, staying in the low ground where it thinks the towers will hide it. I confess I had seen the dust. I had logged it as a wind event because it was a dead world and the dead do not raise dust on purpose. I had seen, too, the smear of a hull against the high haze the day before, and I had logged it as one of the contesting concerned survey drones, because we were on a contested world and of course there would be drones, and a drone is not a threat. A drone is a competitor. "Salvage concerns send drones," I said. "It is a contested claim. We expected observation." "A drone doesn't keep a station for 30 hours over 9 scholars and 1 escort," she said. A drone takes its pictures and goes. That's a crew. And a crew that wants pictures takes them from orbit and leaves. A crew that comes down the shelves on foot in the low ground wants to be close before you know they're there. She let that sit. Then, in exactly the same flat voice, without any change to indicate that she had just said the most frightening thing I had heard in 11,000 worlds. It's a raider crew adjunct. Probably Verta this far out on a contested claim. They strip survey expeditions. The instruments and the data have value, and so do you. They take the scholars alive when they can. The escort they don't bother taking. I'd like to move the camp before dark, up into the high tower, where they have to come at a single file. And I'd like Lead Vol to authorize me to actually do my job instead of standing near the perimeter. I took it to Vol. I want that on the record too, because it is the one thing I did right in those days. I took her warning to the expedition lead and I argued for it, and Cessanarch Vol, old and certain and short of breath, heard me out and then made the decision that very nearly killed all 9 of us. He said the dust was wind. He said the hull was a drone. He said the human was a contractor whose financial incentive was to manufacture threats that justified her fee, and that he had read the same survey profile she had, and it said Tier 11 collapse, no native sapience, and that he was not going to abandon the finest dig of the season to cower in a tower, because a mercenary with a quota of fear to fill had seen shapes in the dust. He said, and I remember the exact shape of it because I have turned it over so many times since, "We are scholars, Alan-Ra. We do not run from the dark because the hired help is afraid of it." Mara Quist was not in the shelter when I brought back his answer. She was at the perimeter, where he had told her to stay. I went out to her with my crest low in the way that means shame among my people, and I told her the lead had declined to move the camp. She nodded once. She had clearly expected it. "All right," she said, and then she did a thing I have thought about every day of the years since. She did not argue. She did not appeal over Vol's head to the contract or the insurers or the law. She did not waste a single sound on a fight she had already lost. She simply began, quietly, to do everything she could do without authorization. She moved her own position. She walked the gallery behind our shelter and came back. She unpacked her hard case for the first time since the transfer station and laid out its contents in the dark with her 2 hands, by feel, without light, and I sat near her because I did not want to be alone with what I now believed, and I watched her ready herself for a thing the expedition lead had forbidden her to prepare for, and she did it without resentment, with the same unhurried economy she had used to set the perimeter. As if the politics of the camp were simply one more feature of a hostile environment to be worked around rather than fought. "He's not wrong that I get paid either way," she said into the dark, while her hands moved. "He's wrong that it means I'm lying. Those are different things. He can't tell them apart because he's never been wrong about something that could kill him." She said it without heat. It was the coldest and most accurate thing anyone said about Cessanarch Vol in all the years I knew him, and she said it the way she said everything, as a finding, not an insult. "What do you think they will do?" I asked. My breath was short. It was not the gravity. "They'll come up the shelves tonight or just before first light," she said. "They like the gray light. They'll come from the low ground, fan out along the bottom gallery, and come up through the city in 2 or 3 groups so that if you run from one you run into another. They'll have the high orbit ship drop a jamming envelope over the ridge first so you can't call out. They'll expect 9 soft targets and 1 escort. They'll plan around the escort. They always plan around one. They've done this to 100 expeditions and it's always 1 or 2 or some little security detail that fights from a fixed position until it's overrun, because that's how it's always gone." Her hand stopped moving. In the moonlight I could see that she had assembled, from the contents of that single case, a great deal more than I had imagined a contractor would carry. "The thing they've never planned around," she said, "is one of us who grew up somewhere that taught her not to fight from a fixed position." I did not understand it then. I asked her what she meant. She looked at me for a moment with those flat dark eyes, and there was nothing unkind in it, only a kind of weighing, as if she were deciding how much of a true thing a soft scholar could hold. "Where I'm from," she said, "the things that hunt you are faster than you, stronger than you, and they hunt in numbers. You don't survive by being faster or stronger or more numerous. You can't be. So you survive by knowing the ground better than they do, by being where they don't expect, by making them come to you one at a time through a place you chose, and by never, ever giving them a target that stands still." She put one piece of her kit into a sheath against her leg, unhurried. "They're going to fight a security detail tonight, adjunct. That's what they came for, and that's what they planned for. They're not going to get one. They're going to get a predator that learned to hunt in a place where it was the prey. There's a difference, they don't know it yet." Then she told me, very simply and very quietly, what I was to do, which was to keep the 8 others in the high tower's lowest chamber, behind the one doorway, on her word, when it began, and to keep them there no matter what they heard, and to not let any of them go out to help her, because the most dangerous thing on the ridge that night, after the raiders themselves, would be a frightened scholar moving in the dark where she did not expect a friendly shape to be. "If it moves and it's not you and the others behind that door," she said, "I'm going to treat it as a target, and I'm going to be right almost every time. Keep them behind the door. That's your whole job. Can you do that?" It was not really a question. I said I could. "Good," she said. And then she went out into the dark city alone, against the orders of the lead, to choose her ground. They came in the gray hour before the sun, exactly as she had said they would. I did not see the beginning of it. I was in the lowest chamber of the high tower with the other 8, where she had told me to put them, and getting them there had been its own small war, because Vol did not want to be told what to do by an adjunct relaying the wishes of a contractor. And it was only when the jamming envelope dropped over the ridge and Imrel's good instruments all went dead at once, every link severed, the survey net gone silent, that the lead's face changed, and he understood, all at once and far too late, that the human had been describing the future and not manufacturing a fear. The envelope dropping was the proof of everything. A dead world does not jam your comms. The dead do not care if you can call for help. Only the living jam you, and only the living who mean to do a thing they do not want overheard. After that, they came behind the door without argument. There is nothing like the loss of your instruments to make a scholar believe in the dark. I will tell you what I heard, because hearing was nearly all I had. I heard first nothing. A long nothing, the gray light leaking gray and grayer under the door, the 8 of us pressed into the cold chamber, Queneth's thin, whistling breath, Imrel's hands moving uselessly over her dead instruments, the Tashin brothers for once not arguing, holding onto each other. I heard the wind. I heard, very faint and far below, the sound a great many bodies make moving over loose stone when they are trying not to be heard and are good at it but not perfect, a sound like the world's longest exhale, and I knew that the lower gallery was filling with the Verta, fanning out as she had said they would, 2 groups 3, coming up through the dead city toward the soft targets they had tracked for 30 hours, certain, professional, unhurried in their own way, 100 expeditions of certainty behind them. And then I heard the city begin to take them. I do not have a better way to say it. It did not sound like a battle. I have heard the recordings of battles in our histories, the great roaring exchanges, the noise of force meeting force. This was not that. This was a series of small sounds spaced out, each one almost gentle, each one final. A short scuff of stone, somewhere off to the left and below. A single soft impact, the sound a body makes when it stops being a thing that holds itself up. A silence. Then a long time later, from somewhere completely different, off to the right and higher, the same sequence. Scuff, impact, silence. She was not where they thought she was. She was never twice in the same place. The dead city, which Vol had refused to surrender to her, she had instead made entirely her own. Every gallery and stair and broken doorway a thing she had walked in daylight and memorized while we catalogued. And now in the gray dark she moved through it, the way a thought moves through a familiar mind. And the Verta, for all their 100 expeditions, were strangers in it, and she took them in ones and twos at the places where the city forced them single file. And the city forced them single file in a great many places, because she had chosen the ground, because choosing the ground was the whole of it. I heard once a voice cry out, a high yellow-throated sound of command turning to a sound of confusion, an order given to a squad that was no longer there to receive it. I heard the answering silence where the squad should have answered. I heard the crew's confidence become its undoing in real time, because a raider crew is built on the certainty that it outnumbers its prey, and that certainty is a kind of courage, and courage that depends on numbers cannot survive the discovery that the numbers are quietly going away in the dark, and no one can say where or how. They began to call to one another. Names, I think. In their language, the rising yellow calls getting more frequent and more frantic, fewer answering each time. The math of it turning against them faster than they could believe it was turning, because no living crew can believe, while it is happening, that one small thing in the dark is doing this, that the escort they planned around is not fighting from a fixed position to be overrun, but is instead out among them, in the gaps, choosing. And that every member of the crew who goes to investigate a friend's silence is simply walking to the place where she has decided to be next. There was a stretch near the end when the calling stopped, and the silence was worse than the calling had been, and one of the junior recorders made a small sound of terror in the dark of our chamber, and Cessanarch Val, our lead who had been wrong about everything, said in a thin voice that we should open the door, that we should run, that staying in one room behind one door was death, and he put his soft writing hands on the door, and I stopped him. I put my own 4 hands on him, and I held the old man against the cold stone wall, and I said, into his ear, the thing she had told me, that the most dangerous thing on the ridge after the raiders was a frightened scholar moving where she did not expect a friendly shape, and that our whole job, our only job, was to be the 8 shapes she did not have to think about, and that if we opened that door we would not be helping her, we would be giving her a problem, and that the kindest and bravest thing we could do for the small human who was out there alone clearing the city of 40 armed raiders so that we might live to write Caldrus down was to stay behind the door and trust her and be still. He wept. I held him. The silence went on. And then there was one more sequence, very close now, just outside in the gallery, scuff and impact and silence. The last of them, the one who had come up the high stair to find the soft targets at last, the one who must have been so certain in the final moments that the awful inexplicable thing happening below him was a malfunction or a trick or a god, anything but one small calm escort, and who came up into the high gallery to claim the prize and found her instead, waiting, where she had decided to be. Then the door opened, and it was her. She stood in the gray light of the gallery with the white seam of scar on her cheek and her stone-colored coat in her 2 hands, and she was breathing a little harder than usual, which was the most strenuous I ever saw her, and there was dark matter on the coat and on her hands that I understood and did not look at directly. She looked at the 8 of us alive behind the door, and something in her face that I could not name eased very slightly, and she said, in exactly the flat, unhurried voice she had used to ask Val about the descent corridor a lifetime ago at the transfer station, "It's clear. The ship pulled out when the Count went against them. You can come up to the light now. There's nothing left on the ridge that wants you." The Count had been 40. I learned the number later from the salvage concerns, who recovered the raiders' own manifest from their abandoned ground vehicle in the dry sea basin, the manifest that listed the crew that had come up the shelves in the gray hour, certain, professional, planning around one escort. 40 had come up. None went back down. She had moved through them in the dark of a dead city for the better part of 2 hours, and she had not raised her voice once, and she had not, I am as certain of this as I am of anything, felt a single moment of the thing we call rage. That is the part I could never make the young adjuncts understand in the years after when I tried to tell this. They wanted to have been heroic in the way our stories are heroic, the righteous fury, the avenger, the warrior aflame. it was not that. It was colder and stranger and far more frightening than that. She had not been angry, she had been working. The raiders had been a hazard of the environment, like the gravity, like the heat, like the scouring dust, a thing that had arrived in her area of responsibility, and that she had therefore, with great economy and no apparent feeling, removed. She finished the sentence the world had started. That was all. The temperature of her never changed. We came up to the light. The sun of Caldris was coming over the ridge, white and enormous, and it lit the dead city the way it had lit it every morning for 10,000 years, and the towers leaned out over the drop, and the wasteland fell away below in its long shelves toward the dry sea. And it was, that morning, the most beautiful and most terrible thing I had ever seen, because it was exactly as beautiful as it had been the morning before, and the only thing that had changed was that we were alive to look at it. And 40 raiders were not. And the difference between those two facts was one small human who was already, while we stood blinking in the dawn, walking the perimeter again, checking the 3 sides, doing her job, as if nothing of any particular note had occurred in the night. Cessanarch Val tried to speak to her. He was a proud man, and he had been wrong, and he understood, I think, in that dawn, how completely wrong, and to his credit he tried to find the words to say so. He went to her at the perimeter with his crest low, and his 4 soft hands open in the gesture of my people that means a debt acknowledged, and he began to speak, some formal thing, something about valor and gratitude and the survey's recognition. She let him get a few words in. Then she said, not unkindly, but in the flat voice that did not waste sounds, "You don't owe me a speech, Lead Vol. You owe me a different decision next time someone tells you the dust is moving wrong." And she turned back to the wasteland and the 3 sides, and that was the end of his speech, and the beginning, for me, of a great deal of difficult thinking that has lasted the rest of my life. Because here is the thing I have never been able to put in any survey log, the thing the sealed file leaves out, the thing I am setting down now while I still can. I had catalogued 11,000 dead worlds, and I had been afraid of none of them, and I had built a whole career, and a whole understanding of the galaxy on the principle that the worlds we mark in the heaviest ink, the saturation worlds, the ones too hostile for civilized life, are simply that, too hostile, dead ends, evolutionary tragedies, places where life had gone to war with itself and produced nothing but monsters fit only for the place that made them. We pitied those worlds in the cataloging halls. We marked them and we passed them by. We never once considered, not seriously, not in a way that changed how we walked into a dead city in the dawn, what it might mean that a thing forged in the very worst of those places, a thing that found our killing gravity to be a mild day and our terrifying raiders to be a hazard of the environment, was sitting on our expeditions in the slot the charter would not let us leave empty, eating less than we ate, carrying more than we carried, watching the 3 sides while we slept. Certain in a way none of us were certain, because she had grown up somewhere that did not permit the kind of certainty Cessanarch Val mistook for wisdom, the certainty of a man who has never once been wrong about a thing that could kill him. We had it precisely backward. We thought the saturation worlds were the dead ends. We thought the things that came from them were monsters fit only for the place that made them. And it is true, I suppose, that she was fit for the place that made her. But the place that made her had not made a dead end. It had made the most adaptable thing I have ever stood beside, a thing that walked our dead worlds the way we walk our libraries, a thing for whom the hazard that ended 11,000 other expeditions was simply the morning's work, and we had been so busy marking her homeworld in our heaviest ink, and passing it by that we had never thought to ask the only question that mattered, which is not what kind of world kills the unfit. Every world kills the unfit. The question is what kind of world keeps doing it for 1 billion years without stopping, and what, at the end of all that, comes walking out of it, calm and small, and unimpressed, to sit in the slot on your manifest that you tried 4 times to strike. I did not strike the line again. On every expedition after Caldris, for the rest of my service, I requested the escort myself, and I requested, where the records allowed me to, the same one, And on 3 more worlds I sat up with her in the small hours while she watched the dark. And I asked her my questions. And she answered the ones she could and was silent on the ones she could not. And I learned more about the galaxy from that small calm human than I had learned in 11,000 dead worlds. Because the dead, it turns out, are not the great teachers. The dead only show you what stopped. She showed me what did not stop, what kept going, what got up off the worst world the Atlas knew and decided, every single morning, without anger, without ceremony, with nothing but the unhurried economy of a thing that had long ago stopped treating hardship as an event, to simply keep watching the 3 sides until the light came up. The survey log says the expedition encountered hostile elements and was successfully extracted. I have read it many times. It is not false. It is simply the record of a people who still believe that dead things cannot harm you, and that the worlds you mark in the heaviest ink are the ones to fear, and who have never spent a gray hour behind a single door in a dead city listening to the small, spaced, final sounds of being wrong about both. I was there. I heard the count go against them. I held the lead against the wall and kept the 8 shapes still. And I came up into the white, enormous light of a cauldrous morning that was exactly as beautiful as the morning before. And I understood, for the first time in 11,000 worlds, what the heavy ink had been trying to tell us all along, and had failed because we had been reading it as a warning about the worlds, when it was only ever a warning about what the worlds make. She is gone now, in the way contractors go, off some other expedition, some other slot on some other manifest, and I am old and my writing hand is not as steady as it was. But I have set it down, the true thing, the thing the file omits. They sent 40 up the shelves in the gray light for 9 soft scholars and 1 small escort, cert, professional, 100 expeditions of certainty behind them. They planned around one. They planned around the wrong one. And when the white sun came over the ridge, the count was settled, and the city was quiet, and she was already walking the perimeter, checking the 3 sides, breathing only a little harder than usual doing the morning's work, while the rest of us stood in the light and finally, far too late, began to learn.